Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the community of those who dare to look at the ruthless reality of the world order. Today, we are going to strip away the suffocating lies of the mainstream media, the hypocritical moralizing from the podiums in Washington and Brussels, to examine a geopolitical corpse being dissected right before our eyes. The Western elite are buzzing about peace talks and United Nations votes, calling it diplomacy, calling it cautious progress. But the naked truth they do not want you to know is that this is a retreat. What we are witnessing is not a peace process, but a death warrant signed in diplomatic ink for a nation that the West explicitly encouraged to commit suicide. Let us look straight at what just happened exactly on the 4th anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion. At the UN General Assembly, a resolution proposed by Ukraine was put forward, calling for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace, and an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. This resolution reaffirmed Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. It passed with 107 votes during an emergency session. 12 countries, including Russia, Belarus, North Korea, and Iran, voted against it. But the most devastating detail, the detail that exposes the absolute fraud of this entire system, is the fact that the United States chose to abstain. America joined 51 other countries, including China and India, to stand on the sidelines. What do they tell you the reason is? Tammy Bruce, the U.S. Deputy Representative to the UN, stood up and declared that Washington welcomes a ceasefire, but the language in the resolution could distract from ongoing negotiations and diplomatic avenues. What a pathetic excuse. Keith Kellogg, a former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine who stepped down in 2025 and is a respected figure in Kiev, immediately took to X to ruthlessly slam Washington for this decision. He asked if 4 years of war, missing children, the shelling of cities, and the killing of innocents were not enough. He emphasized that this is a war, not a business deal. But Kellogg's outrage, however sincere, is merely proof of the profound naivety of those who simply do not understand the cold logic of power. The American abstention was not a slip of the tongue or a sudden hesitation over vocabulary. It is a loss-cutting mechanism. It is the preparation for a strategic rout. Look at what is being orchestrated behind closed doors. U.S. and Ukrainian officials are scrambling to hold another round of talks in Geneva, Switzerland, on February 26th. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who co-leads the American delegation, are traveling there to negotiate. Witkoff has been speaking on the phone on a near-daily basis with Rustem Umerov, Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Secretary. Their goal, according to Witkoff after seeking permission from President Volodymyr Zelensky, is to continue the conversations initiated in mid-February to explore ways of reaching a peace agreement. The previous negotiations held on February 17th and 18 ended without any breakthrough on territorial issues or a ceasefire. Why is America rushing to the negotiating table like this? Because the machinery of attrition warfare has ground the delusions of the neoconservatives into dust. In an industrial war of attrition, firepower and manpower dictate everything. Russia possesses a massive industrial base and an overwhelming manpower advantage. Ukraine is bleeding to death. The elites in Washington know that Ukraine cannot win, but they cannot publicly admit their historical blunder. We must turn the historical axis back to the Bucharest summit in April 2008. That is when this tragedy was seeded. We announced that Georgia and Ukraine would become members of NATO. William Burns, a veteran American diplomat, warned explicitly that this was the brightest of all red lines for the entire Russian leadership. Russia was terrified by the prospect of a hostile military alliance creeping right up to their doorstep. That is an existential security threat. Any great power, including the United States, would react ruthlessly when facing a similar threat in the Western Hemisphere. But we ignored that reality. We led Ukraine down the primrose path straight into hell, encouraged them to poke a nuclear-armed bear in the eye, and now as their country is being turned into a dysfunctional rump state, we are packing our bags in Geneva. And while Washington looks for the exit, Ukraine is thrashing in its death throes. The State Security Service of Ukraine just launched an overnight drone attack on the Klykino oil pumping station in Russia's Tatarstan on February 23rd. Two massive storage tanks, each with a 50,000 metric ton capacity, caught fire. This pumping station serves the massive Druzhba pipeline network, which carries nearly 2 million barrels of crude oil per day from Russia through Belarus and Ukraine to Central Europe. The facility is also a major hub for domestic Russian refineries. The physical consequence was immediate. Russia's state-owned pipeline monopoly, Transneft, was forced to cut its crude intake by 250,000 barrels per day, affecting the volumes and quality of shipped oil. Transneft handles more than 80% of Russia's crude output and had already warned producers back in September 2025 that output cuts might be necessary due to Ukrainian drone strikes. President Zelensky calls these strikes on Russian energy assets the sanctions that work the fastest. Kyiv argues these are legitimate military targets because they finance Moscow's war machine. But you must understand this is not a winning strategy. This is the desperate lashing out of a strangled nation. Ukraine is trying to inflict economic pain on Russia, but in the process, they are tearing apart the Western alliance itself. The Klykino tanks balance oil flows for the Druzhba pipeline, which is the energy lifeline for Hungary and Slovakia, the only EU countries still importing Russian crude through the system. The pipeline has been offline since late January following a Russian strike, according to Ukrainian authorities. But what is the political fallout? Hungary and Slovakia accused Ukraine of deliberately delaying repairs. They immediately retaliated against Kyiv by blocking the EU's latest round of sanctions against Russia. Even more ruthlessly, Budapest blocked a planned 90 billion euro loan for Kyiv over this exact pipeline dispute. Even though Ukraine claimed to have proposed doable solutions to resolve the transit conflict with Hungary, it was entirely useless. This is the brutal reality. When energy bills skyrocket and economic survival is threatened, all appeals to moral solidarity evaporate into thin air. Selfish national interest will always crush hollow ideals. But the pinnacle of hypocrisy, the clearest proof of the double standards of the strong, comes from Washington itself. In November 2025, the U.S. State Department issued a warning to Kyiv over a Black Sea drone strike. Ukraine attacked the port city of Novorossiysk on November 14th, damaging a major oil terminal. Weeks later, on November 29th, naval drones attacked the area again, striking the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's marine terminal and forcing the facility to suspend oil shipments. Although Kyiv never officially confirmed this second attack, the reaction from Washington was swift and punitive. Ola Stefanishina, Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., received a formal diplomatic démarche from the State Department following the November 29th strike. Why was America so furious when its ally attacked its enemy? Stefanishina stated the naked truth at a briefing. The démarche concerned the very fact that American economic interests were violated there. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium is an international venture linking Kazakhstan's western fields with the Novorossiysk Sea Terminal. The American oil giant Chevron is a major shareholder in that consortium. Think about this bitter irony. Washington constantly pushes the Ukrainian people to throw their bodies into bloody trenches to defend the so-called rules-based order. They are perfectly willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. But the exact second that Chevron's profit margins are threatened, the moment an American corporation's cash flow is interrupted, Washington pivots instantly and takes a club straight to Kyiv's hands. Great powers always use small nations as disposable pawns, and they will trample over their survival the moment core imperial interests are touched. Against this catastrophic backdrop, current aid efforts are nothing more than a mechanism to prolong the agony. On the fourth anniversary of the invasion, Canada announced a new military package worth 1.4 billion US dollars, or 2 billion Canadian dollars, allocated for the 2026-27 fiscal year to strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities. Ottawa promised to provide 400 armored vehicles, including 66 light armored vehicles produced by General Dynamics and 383 Senator armored personnel carriers manufactured by Rochelle. Canadian Defense Minister David McGuinty announced the extension of the Unifier training program for Ukrainian troops for an additional 3 years until 2029. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand pledged an additional $20 million to Ukraine's Energy Support Fund to help procure critical equipment. Canada also slapped sanctions on 21 individuals, 53 entities, and 100 vessels linked to Russia's shadow fleet and coordinated with international partners to lower the price cap on Russian crude oil from $47.6 to $44.1 per barrel. Minister Anand eloquently declared that Canada remains steadfast in defending Ukraine's sovereignty and that Russia must be held accountable for its unprovoked aggression. Canada has indeed remained one of Ukraine's key military supporters, providing weapons, training, and financial assistance since the start of the full-scale invasion. But what do 400 armored vehicles mean against the massive weight of Russian artillery? Nothing. They will be vaporized in the meat grinders of the East in a matter of weeks. They do not alter the structural imbalance of power. They only ensure that more human lives will be extinguished before geopolitical reality brings down the final curtain. Washington is pivoting. The true existential interest of the United States lies in East Asia, where a massive, powerful China is rising as the sole peer competitor capable of challenging American hegemony. Staying bogged down in Europe to salvage a disastrous foreign policy project is geopolitical suicide, and therefore Ukraine will be left behind, a shattered and ruined wasteland, serving as a chilling testament to the price a small nation pays when it foolishly trusts the empty promises of the Western liberal elite. We engineered this tragedy through our own hubris, and now reality is returning to punish us in the most ruthless manner possible. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop questioning the lies of this system. The truth, no matter how brutal, is always out there waiting for us to face it. Until next time.